as we conclude season 2, it's a good time to reflect on the podcast itself, our community, our audience, where we've been, and a little bit about where we're going. So I started this podcast about 2 years ago. And at the time, the goal was very simple. It was to have in-depth and thorough conversations with leading experts on important topics that we should all learn more about because they're going to affect all of us. And to offer opinions, perspectives, and points of view that you might not hear. In fact, you likely won't hear anywhere else. You're not going to hear them in traditional media. You're not going to hear them in your daily conversations. And for all of the wonderful podcasts that are out there, you're probably not going to hear them on those because those podcasts have an agenda, a point of view. And so they filter who they bring on and they steer the conversations towards a narrative that's already predetermined. We wanted to be different than all of that. Different from traditional media, which is often chasing the headlines of the day. This show is about stepping back from all of that and looking at bigger trends, bigger topics, how we can put the context around the issues of today and the risks of tomorrow and the opportunities of the future. And we wanted to be different than other podcasts who have a definitive point of view, who basically tell you what to think, who lead you on a narrative, who have predetermined outcomes, who lack curiosity and simply offer you lectures and then bring on guests to back predetermined points of view. We didn't want to do that either. This was truly about having conversations where a curious mind such as mine explores topics that I hope others find interesting with guests who maybe have a point of view, but we step back from promoting that and we just have a conversation about the facts as we understand them, the points of view around those, to help us all gain new perspective on big topics and big issues to better inform ourselves and color the context around the world we live in. And I think we've done that. I will tell you that I didn't necessarily think we'd have so many episodes at this point. I'm very proud of the body of work that we've put together on this show. This is episode 62 as you're listening to it. We had about 30 episodes in season 1, far more than I was anticipating. And we ended up about that same number in season 2. So this is the season 2 wrap up. But as I look back across the last couple of years, I just wanted to reflect on who we've brought on, the topics that we have covered. And I really want to share with you why I think I've achieved something with this show, and I hope that you are all benefiting from it, but I will have a call to action for you to share this show with your friends as we get to the end of this episode, which will just feature me. No interviews this week. You're just going to hear from me for a little while. When we go back to season 1, there are so many topics that we covered then that are just as salient today, which was a big part of the goal of this show, is that whether you're listening to the day that we posted the show, or you're listening 2 years or 5 years from now, it'll still have relevance. It'll still have salience. You may remember my very first full episode after the pilot was just a half hour of conversations between me and you on the American presidency and whether it's too big for a single individual person. And as I record this program, we've had a change in administration in the United States, and those very same questions are still coming back to us. But when you heard that show the first time, you may have been looking at it through the lens of who the president was at that time, and maybe the presidents that you'd seen prior to that. But we have a new president, a new administration, a different place, a different time. So perhaps what we said then will be seen through different sets of eyes now because a different person holds that office. I encourage you to go back and listen to that first episode and now ponder those questions that we posed with new leaders in mind. We talked about artificial intelligence as one of the earliest topics on this program. That was April of 2023, and I offered some of my opening thoughts at that time. It has been almost 20 months since I posted that show, and a lot has changed, but my opening thoughts and my general point of view on the topic hasn't changed all that much. If you remember back to that episode, I offered an opinion that I believed that AI was going to be an assistant to people rather than a replacement for them. And we've had many conversations on this show about artificial intelligence since that episode in April of 2023. In fact, we have brought on some of the smartest people that we can find on this topic who have a variety of opinions, both optimistic and concerning. If you think about what artificial intelligence means, Sharon Goldman joined our show in episode 20 in November of 2023 to talk about the business aspect of AI. And she's the Venture Beat senior writer and editor to talk about where these companies were going, what the risks were, and how many challenges that we still had to go through. And as recently as, if you're listening to this show in January of 2025, as recently as this last week, AI has been a prominent conversation with the new American U.S. president administration, but also around the world as concerns and opportunities arise around the next generation of AI development that could make significant leaps forward. And so we were talking about this long before anybody else was. We were asking the questions, the important questions, long before anybody else was. There's a reason why we started season 2, this last season, with the same topic. We brought back a recurring guest, Payman Poyekta, to talk about AI uses, AI risks, the ethics for startups and tech companies. And we spent almost an hour really chewing through a topic that we'd covered in season 1, but many things had changed in that time. And that topic is just as salient, if not more so today, than it was in season 1. And then later in the season, in episode 7 of our season 2, this season, we once again talked about the potential of AI, and this time in the context of cybersecurity, of ransomware, of what AI could do in the wrong hands. Another topic that is front and center for so many people who are thinking about what AI will mean for their business, for society as a whole. And then, let's not forget, we had a very important conversation with Demetrius Flautas on the existential threats of advanced artificial intelligence, where we really explored in great detail and with a lot of future-looking thoughts and reflections and warnings about what regulation needs to be brought into place sooner rather than later before the developers of advanced AI get away from our ability to reasonably regulate them. So that topic alone that we have covered so many times on this show, we were talking about it before anybody else was. We were bringing on guests and opinions before anybody else was. We were thinking ahead before the major news cycle, before many of the business community, before many of the consultants and analysts. And we were talking with the people who had been spending a career, in some cases a lifetime, thinking about what this means for us. That's a great example of what I wanted this show to be. You're not going to have AI in the headlines every day, but it is such an important trend affecting every aspect of our lives that it's important that we approach it from different angles, with different opinions, with different leaders, and do it in a fairly dispassionate way. We're not telling you what to think about it. We're not advocating for a specific point of view. We simply wanted to bring on individuals who could share their expert opinions to allow you to be a more informed member of society and a global citizen. What are some of the other trends that we've talked about that are making news and that are part of our daily life now? Well, we've spent several conversations talking about cybersecurity. And how many times have we heard about a major data breach, sometimes involving national security? If you've listened to this show, then you are very, very aware of where those threats are and how serious they can be. You've also been able to take a step back and think about how businesses and governments should prepare, but also how individuals should prepare. We've also talked on this program about the important advances in medical research. Season 1, we talked about everything from advances around Parkinson's disease to talking about simply living better with alternative medicines. Another topic that I know you've thought so much about and has been a big part of our news, and here in the U.S. is becoming an even more important part of our news. We were talking about it before anybody else was. We brought Tina Woods on this show, episode 18 in season 1, about living longer and healthier through traditional and through new medicine. In this season alone, as I look back and I think about the conversations that were so important this year that have bubbled up in our minds, it was episode 2. We had Carlo Ruza on to talk about populism and nationalism and the rule of law. Now, that focused on Europe, but now that trend is global. And so a topic that was important 10 months ago, maybe even more now, but we talked about that in a time and in a place before everybody else was thinking about it. We also had conversations about the human trafficking issues around, unfortunately, sports. We talked about that with Claudia Villa before the Olympic Games. And for those who follow the Olympics, it was a topic that was discussed in and around those games. And hopefully our conversation shed important and additional light on it. We went into some detail about the U.S.-China rivalry, particularly in cyberspace. We had Foreign Policy Magazine reporter Rishi Iyengar on the show. This was episode 12 of this season. And with a new administration in the U.S. and a lot of attention being paid to China, that 60-minute interview is even more salient now than it was the time that we shared it. We spent some time talking about Latin America this year. Brazil in particular, we had 2 episodes dedicated to it, but we also talked about U.S. foreign policy in Latin America and beyond. Lyman Stone joined us for a fascinating conversation on declining fertility rates around the world and in the United States, another topic that at the time was being discussed in some corners, but now is a mainstream topic. If you'd been listening to this show, if you downloaded our program, you'd have been ahead of that curve as well. We talked about very controversial, very difficult topics like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the prospects of a 2-state solution. Much has happened since that time when we had the conversation in October of 2024, but so many of the points made in that interview, in that conversation, are even more important to think about today than they were when we shared, because time has passed and you can now see what our conversation got right and maybe what we missed. We talked about the future and the past and the present of a region like Kashmir, which I will argue maybe hasn't bubbled up in the headlines yet, but stay tuned. It does pretty frequently. It likely will again. And if you want to have a primer on an important conflict zone in the world with a complex history, that's a very important one to listen to. We brought Marika Sosnowski on to talk about the complexities of ceasefire deals. And we've just gone through one, and we're still going through one here in January 2025 in the Middle East. And there may be another ceasefire deal still to come in Eastern Europe between Russia and Ukraine. Marika walked us through so many of the challenges with getting to, implementing, and sticking to a ceasefire. And let's not forget that Marika spent a lot of time studying the Syrian crisis. And you know what happened this most recent year with a complete breakdown of that ceasefire and ultimately the overthrow of the existing government. We had been talking about that long before it happened, and we've been talking about what the ceasefires would look like or could look like and what challenges would face them. That topic is just as salient now as it was the day we recorded the show. And then more recently, we had one of the more fascinating conversations that mixed business, economics, money, spirituality, and our place in the world with Philip Ullman, who joined the show, a self-described social business entrepreneur, to help us think about all these topics around personal finance, business, and economics, but through a more spiritual and fulfilling lens. I don't think you're going to get that interview anywhere else. All due respect to our colleagues at the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, the Financial Times, CNBC here in the United States, or other financial reporters around the world, this is not a topic that they spend much time thinking about. And yet we, as people who work for and start businesses and lead businesses and work for businesses, we should. Because we're not just a business person and a spiritual person. We are all one person. I say all of this not to pat myself on the back, but to say thank you to everybody who has enabled us to have these conversations. And I hope that you will share this body of work, this 62 episode series of podcasts spread across 2 years, because there's not a single topic that we covered that was timely when we posted it that isn't still timely today. There's not a topic that we discussed that doesn't have some context and color to add to the news of the day. And so I want as many people as possible to have access to these shows, to listen to what we have shared, to form their own opinions, and hopefully to continue to build our community of curious minds who can then go back into their communities with all this new information and think about how they will apply it in their own lives, in their own business, in their own countries. The other thing I want to make sure that we talk about as we wrap up season 2 is what it is that I really want everybody to get from this body of work that we've put together. I simply want us to be a more conversational global community. The thing that I am most proud of with this show is what a global reach this little podcast has had, that I get comments from all over the world. It's a crowded media environment in the United States. It's hard to break through. It's hard to break through everywhere, but I have been so happy to hear from listeners in Latin America, all throughout Latin America, from Mexico to Chile, from Brazil and Argentina and Colombia to Ecuador and Dominican Republic. It's been fun to get commentary from South Asia. We have a lot of listeners in India. We have a lot of listeners in Australia. We have a lot of listeners in Central Europe. We have listeners across the Middle East and North Africa. We even have listeners throughout sub-Saharan Africa. And so it's hard to do a program that's relevant for people all over the world, regardless of their situations. And certainly some of our shows are more targeted at one region or another. We had several episodes this year on Latin America that I'm sure were more important and more interesting to our Latin American audience. And yet I know people around the world who are just curious about the region, who found it fascinating because they just haven't thought that much about Latin America's place in the world, even though they're very aware of those countries. I've heard from so many people who have strong feelings and opinions around topics from the Ukraine war to human trafficking to ceasefires and the war in the Middle East. I've heard from so many folks who just have strong views, but were grateful that they could come to a place and listen to some facts without being lectured and told what to think. And so it's very fulfilling for me to know that I've been able to help in a small way advance the human conversation between all cultures everywhere in the world. And we want to continue to grow that. I'm also really proud that as we wrap up season 2, our YouTube channel has now over 100,000 subscribers, which is a big deal. Look, I know there's a lot of other podcasts in the millions. I congratulate them, and I'm grateful that they've had the success that they've had. But for us to have this little independent show that doesn't have any major advertisers behind it, that doesn't have any major media conglomerate pushing it, that we've been able to earn this through word of mouth, through sharing, through building a genuine and authentic community is a real honor and privilege. And it makes all the hours that we put into doing this show worth it. So I want to thank you all who've been part of this journey. And I look forward to season 3. Now, I think we're going to do a couple of different things in season 3. One of the things I heard from all of you was that these shows they're meaty and they're impactful and they're important, but they do require a lot of thinking. And sometimes you want to go back and listen more than once. So I respect that. And I think it's important for us to be able to deliver shows that you have time to listen to digest, to think about, and maybe to re-listen to. So we'll probably be doing fewer episodes in the next season, but more impactful episodes. I also heard loud and clear from all of you that you love the guests, but you want to hear more from me. You want more of, what am I reading? What am I interested in? Even if I haven't been able to find a guest to think about it yet, you want to follow along with what topics and trends and issues and megatrends that are on my mind and how I'm interpreting them. And I respect that a podcast platform is so much about the individual personality and that we have to continue to build our relationship as a host and a listener and that we have a conversation back and forth, and that you also asked that I open things up to answer more questions. I was hesitant to do that in the early days because I just didn't feel that I would have anywhere near as many useful answers and opinions as the guests I would bring on. But I now understand that so much of this is just understanding where I'm coming from and what I'm thinking about, since that is the genesis of the show after all. So I've heard you. Season 3 will reflect some of those changes, and I hope you'll stick around with me for them. And we will also emphasize more of our clips on the YouTube channel, and you'll be hearing a little bit more from me about, again, what am I reading, what am I hearing, what am I interpreting. But we will stick to the core tenets of this show. Number one, we're not going to tell you what to think. We're not going to press a narrative. We're not going to push an agenda or a point of view. We are going to talk about trends. We're going to talk about big issues that we see now and in the future as they come around the corner. And we're going to do the best we can to keep you ahead of the curve on the news cycle, but also to keep coloring in the context of the world that we're living in. We are not going to delve into the political arena or into controversial topics where we're trying to take a side and advocate for a position. There are plenty of other podcasts out there to do that. We want to be the territory of neutrality. The other goal that I have for Season 3, it's a personal goal, and I'm very optimistic we'll be able to meet this with some of the credibility we've built, is to bring on guests who have an important message but don't have a place to talk about it in detail. And maybe individuals who have a point of view that they want to explore with a global audience, but do so without an interviewer hammering them and with gotcha questions. So this would be more prominent guests, people that you might recognize, people who may be controversial, but we're going to have a conversation with them. And we are neither going to confirm nor contradict their opinions. We're going to explore them. And through that exploration, we'll all learn a little bit more. And I think that's the most value that we can bring, a value that nobody else is even trying to bring, a neutral ground where anybody with an honest point of view, with an intellectual curiosity, who's open to a conversation, can come and over the course of an hour or so have an in-depth, curious conversation with people who just want to explore their intellectual process. And we will continue to advocate for that and share that with a global audience. So as we wrap up Season 2, I want to thank all of you for being part of this community. And I really do ask you all to share. You know, a lot of podcasters try to make a pile of money off of their shows, and they're always asking you to buy something, or they're asking you to subscribe to something and pay for it. We are asking only for one thing for right now, and that is to just help us grow this community. Because we are not backed by some large donors or, backed by any major advertiser. This truly is a grassroots community. And it means a lot to us that you're here, that you've subscribed to this program. It means a lot to me personally that you would share us with your friends and family, that you would find the content you have here useful enough to kind of put your endorsement. And that's the best thing you can do for me. It's your personal endorsement that means the most. When you subscribe to this show, when you share with your friends and family, when you share with your community and you grow our community and you talk about the themes and topics that you've heard here, that means more to me than anything else that you could do. And it's free. It doesn't cost you anything at all. It doesn't even cost you time. And I hope that these conversations that we've started here enrich your conversations with the curious minds in your life. If you'd like to help us out by sharing the program, it doesn't matter to me which format you do it. YouTube is largely global, so subscribing there and sharing the channel is probably the easiest way no matter where you are in the world. But if you'd like to share us on one of your social media platforms, we'd appreciate that. You can always visit my website, brianjmatos.com, and find out more about me, the show, and links to our YouTube clips. And of course, if you like to listen to this show on a traditional podcast platform, this show is available everywhere. We are not exclusive to any specific platform at this time. We are on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify, we're on iHeartRadio, some of the most popular. We're on Amazon Music, and pretty much any popular or well-known podcast platform where you can upload an RSS feed, we've done that to make sure our show is accessible to everybody, everywhere, in the platform of your choosing. And we'll continue to explore different ways to share our clips and content so that anybody anywhere in the world has access to our conversations. It has been a real joy over these last 2 years to present these conversations, these interviews, and these topics to you. I look forward to continuing the journey in Season 3, and we'll talk again real soon. And in the meantime, as I have asked at the end of every episode since the very first, my only ask of you is that you remain curious, and that you keep your curious minds open to new points of view and new opinions. And so it is with that spirit that I conclude Season 2 with the call to once again stay curious.